Welcome back to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Ewell, and today we're going to be talking about the habit of meditation. But I have a special guest, Mr. James Brown, the white version of James Brown.
Not that James Brown.
He is a meditation guru that just got done teaching us in the last couple hours some better ways to meditate. But I want to welcome you to the show, number one. Number two is, I think the introductory could obviously be a little bit better, but can you give me kind of an idea of where you've came from and where you are today in like 10 seconds or like two statements?
Yeah, well, I want to start with talking about guru, right? Because the word guru gets misunderstood. The word guru just means remover of darkness.
Okay.
Right? The idea is that you are light. Like at your core, you are light. Like a guru doesn't shine his light on you. What a guru does is remove some of the clouds that obscure your light. The Sanskrit word gu means darkness, and ru is remover. So that's what a guru is. So in that context, if what we talk about today can help remove some of the misperceptions people have about meditation, then I'm pretty comfortable with that term.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like that term.
Yeah.
So well, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
We met and had the opportunity to meet about 6 weeks ago at a biohacking conference in LA, and I did your meditation session, and then we end up next to each other in was it John?
JP's breathwork class,
Yeah, in the breathwork class, and all of a sudden I look over and this guy's looking at me and we kind of make eye contact. I'm like, hey, like it's like our first date, except
a lot of heavy breathing.
Yeah, it was this amazing experience, but that's kind of how we met, and I thought it was pretty cool not only to go through your course and your training, but also to watch you really like dive into what we were doing at the conference and just be kind of a participator in that. So
yeah, no, I love JP, and I love learning new things from new people that I meet, new experiences. In fact, JP and I jumped off the platform together too.
Nice.
We became like best conference buddies.
Yeah. You know what's funny about that is I was the next person to jump.
Oh, you told me. Yeah.
And I'm like looking over the edge and I see this guy literally like can't move.
Yeah, he got hurt. Yeah.
Yeah, so I run over to the other side because I'm like, I'm not missing this opportunity to jump. And I get over to the other side and I'm in the like first part of the line, and all of a sudden they shut the whole thing down, so I never got an opportunity to jump. So
next year.
Yeah, next year.
Exactly.
So let's talk about meditation. One of the things that I want to talk about is if you look up the definition of meditation, it's all about like thinking. It's all about, let's just say it's all about doing. And what is your actual definition of meditation?
So I think that the meditation's a really big term. It's a big umbrella, and there's a lot of things that fit underneath that umbrella. It's kind of like working out, right? It used to be just, do you work out? Yeah. Now that's not a sufficient answer.
Right.
I'm, like I said, fairly old. I'm old enough to remember that when I was in high school and I would go jogging, people would stop to offer me a ride. Because they'd be like, whoa, you look like you're in a hurry, get in. I'm like, no, I'm exercising for exercise.
Right.
And they thought that was crazy. Like, I'm not a competitive track runner. Like, what am I running for? And so in the same way that I really do have to talk right into this mic. In the same way that we might, not be satisfied with the term working out, I think the term meditation, we can parse it a little bit. And there's different types of meditation based on what you're essentially trying to do, right? Are you trying to control your mind? Are you trying to develop focus and concentration? Are you trying to curate your consciousness? You're trying to have nicer thoughts, gratitude thoughts, or thoughts of ambivalence, or not ambivalence, abundance instead of scarcity. And all of those practices are in some way or another about thinking, about having fewer thoughts or nicer thoughts. There's another practice of meditation, another approach to meditation, which is kind of like a being technique. You're not trying to do very much. You're trying to allow yourself to be. And because being is what you are at your core, it's actually pretty easy. You just have to learn to get out of the way. So the approach to meditation I teach, or the core approach I teach, because I do other things as well, is this practice of being, of allowing yourself to meditate, of learning how to get out of the way and to allow the mind to flow. And I call it Vedic meditation when I teach it live. And then I have an online course that I call Flow Meditation. And in fact, the workshop you took at the conference was a flow meditation workshop. That's what we did this morning.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
For our listeners out there, if you're wondering how to access this type of meditation, I'll put it in the show notes, how to directly sign up for that. And all the listeners will have a discount code for that, which will be in the show notes. But so there's many different types of meditation. One of the things that we talked about downstairs was, I think kind of as beginners, we learn these guided meditation. We learn, we have all these apps and things like that. And I think, that's meditation, but that's kind of like a baby learning how to crawl. Yeah. It's kind of the beginning introduction of meditation. What's kind of the stages that you learned in, and then like what do you see people learning best today? Like how they go through these different stages of types of meditation?
Well, I think we all learn in a way that's relevant to our current context, right? When I started to learn to meditate in my mid-30s, there was no such thing as apps. There was no such thing as guided meditations. What meditation was when I started learning was Buddhism. Right? Mindfulness didn't exist as a term. Mindfulness is just sort of Buddhism stripped of Buddha to make it more teachable in schools and workplaces. So there's none of the religious trappings, but also there's not a lot of the wisdom of the Buddha, a lot of those teachings. It's just a series of exercises. So when I learned, I tried Buddhism because I thought Buddha was this guy who invented this thing called meditation, and that was what I did. I tried different Zen centers of different degrees of austerity, and I tried sitting in that particular way. I tried controlling my mind. I tried concentrating and focusing, and I gave up after about a year and a half of flailing away, pretty convinced that I couldn't meditate. I liked the ideas of meditation, but the practice never stuck with me as a habit. And this is habit-based lifestyle.
Right.
I'm really interested in opening people up to an idea that there may be a way of meditating that it's easier to make a habit, that it's easier to do, easier to fit into your life, more accessible. So these days, because we live in a world of apps and guided meditations and things like that, that's how most people start. I don't think it's the easiest type of meditation, but I think it's where people start. And I love apps because they open a door for a lot of people to be interested in meditation, but right. I also love apps because they don't take you very far. I think about 70% of the people that I've taught to meditate in the last couple of years have said something like, I've been using Headspace for a while, or I was using Calm for a while, and there's this idea that maybe there's more to experience. And there absolutely is more to experience. In fact, we were talking about the biohacking conference. The reason I was there is because the CEO of that company learned to meditate with me in Seattle when he was living up there, and he said the same thing. He was like using Headspace for about 2 years, and I showed him a way of meditating that allowed him to have a consistently deeper experience. And so it's just where people start. I think
Sure.
what we need to understand, though, is that when you're doing a guided meditation, it is kind of like baby steps. You're having the most surface experience possible and calling it a meditation. Because when you're listening to a guided meditation, you're following instructions and you're visualizing and you're listening and staying in the flow of what the person's saying. And that's something you can get distracted away from. And those are fairly highly cognitive functions, listening, visualizing, following instructions. And what I was trained in and what we did in the gym downstairs this morning is discover that if you let go of all those kinds of things, you can have a deeper experience in meditation, not trying to have a deep experience. And so that was the big aha moment for me. I was like, in my first couple of days on the course I took, the live course I took 11 and a half years ago, I had a deeper experience in that meditation than I'd had in my entire year and a half of flailing away at Buddhist practices, trying to do this and
right.
trying to do that. And I thought that was just striking. I'm like, wow, how is it possible to have what I at that point thought of as a better meditation, not trying to have a good meditation?
Yeah, and I kind of think of, this guided meditation as doing meditation. And then I think of the meditation you were teaching today as being in meditation, and there's a huge difference. I think a lot of us are doing things that resemble meditation, but we don't ever actually learn how to be in meditation. And I think that's an important thing to understand. And I think in the beginning, doing is force. Doing is forcing ourselves or making stuff happen. And I think eventually, as we progress into anything, we have to be in a place to be able to do this and be an observer in it. And what I've learned from you just in the last few times I've taken a class is like, hey, we have to move away eventually from doing and start being. And that really is what brings us to this present place.
Yeah, well, I would say that we have to combine doing and being.
Sure.
Right, so here's maybe a roundabout way of getting into this. A lot of people I meet will say things like, oh, cycling is my meditation, or gardening is my meditation, or art is my meditation, and they'll reference some activity. And I know exactly what they mean when they say that, because I used to say cycling was my meditation, because I was convinced that I couldn't meditate. Right. But that was sucky to admit at parties. And so what I did is I would say, hey, cycling's my meditation. I do moving meditation. And in fact, I was having a conversation with a cyclist at a cafe in San Francisco recently. And I said, look, I don't want to harsh your mellow, but cycling is not your meditation. But I know why you say that, because you say that, and whether it's cycling or gardening or art or whatever, or exercise or working out, it's because when you engage in that activity, it consistently, not all the time, but consistently takes you out of your brain chatter. Right? And because that's such a rare experience for you, you think of that as meditation. But really, what happens in that moment? What happens in those moments when we're having an immersive experience? People will say, I lost myself gardening. And it's really interesting that we use that term, because what it means is that I lost an experience of what I normally define myself as, which is my thinking about my problems, about my to-do list, about my worries, my anxieties. And because that's our dominant experience in consciousness, that's what we think of ourselves as. That's why we say I lost myself. What I would say is that when you have an immersive experience like that, where you're combining doing and being, you're in a state of flow, you're actually finding yourself. But that's not how we label it. And so you're right. Most people, when they approach meditation, look at it as something to do. I want to get good at this. I want to get better at focusing. I want to have more gratitude. I want to affect my life or my brain or my consciousness in this way. But really at your core, you're being, right? We're human beings. They haven't changed the definition of our species in Wikipedia yet. Yeah, we're not human doings, right? We live our life as if life is one long to-do list. And at the end of that life, there's a final box you check, or someone checks it for you, it just says die, right? And then, they put on your tombstone, he got it all done. What a great life he must have had. He got it all done.
Yeah.
And your job isn't to get everything done. It's to be present while doing. And again, your job is not to do nothing. I think what's really important is that flow is not an experience you can generally have when you're doing nothing. It's something that you're engaged in, but you're fully engaged in. And the thing I teach people is that there's a way of meditating which is in itself a flow approach to meditation, and the approach then leads to you being able to do that or have that consciousness in more of your life, whatever you're doing, so that more of your life becomes what you normally experience when you're gardening or cycling or working out.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we have all these, things like running. Sometimes I even think of actually going for a hike or walk in the morning.
Yeah.
Feels a lot like meditation, but really what it is based on what you're saying is we're in this state of flow while we're doing this, and maybe we're not used to being in that state.
No, we're not.
It feels like we're meditating.
Yeah, exactly. What you are is you're fully present.
Okay.
Like when you're on a hike and you're not stuck in your head worried about stuff, you're fully present. When a 2-year-old is sitting on the beach playing in sand in the incredibly immersive way a 2-year-old can play with sand, they're in total flow.
Yeah.
Right? When someone is taking microdosing on some substance and they have an experience where they're just looking at their genes and they can see the warp and weft of the fabrics and they can see the interconnectedness of it all, and it can be this amazing immersive experience, that's just being fully present for what's available.
Okay.
The question is, can you cultivate that as your default state of consciousness when you're older than 2 and when you're not microdosing?
Sure.
Right? Because to me, that's the thing that we talk about, can I make flow a habit? Can I have a life of not the daily grind, but the daily flow, this notion of everyday flow.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's, I think, the way to think about it, what's possible.
Yeah. So what are some ways that you could get into flow? Like some simple ways for you, if you were teaching it to a listener, how to kind of move beyond the apps and how to kind of move beyond these beginner things and begin to experience maybe like this flow that you're talking about with meditation.
Well, so here's something. Here's something that we were going to do today. We just kind of ran out of time.
Okay.
Right? So in addition to teaching what I would consider to be this flow approach to meditation, which is a daily practice that you do a couple of times a day, I also teach a mindfulness technique, but a very flow approach to mindfulness. Usually mindfulness is about focusing on something or doing a body scan or something like that. And what I teach is an exercise called coming to your senses, and I think I can teach that to you right now.
Okay.
Right? We can teach that. It'll be a short version of it. We go into more detail on the course. But here's what I would recommend doing if you want to feel more in the flow of the present moment. And it has to do with how we use our phones, right? And because we're doing a podcast, neither of us have our phones with us, so I'm going to use my hand. Right? So a lot of times when people use their phone, and I'm talking to everyone out there because I do this too, we use our phones to sort of dissipate little moments of anxiety. Right? We're not doing something, or we have a moment's pause and we're like, phone, it's what we do. Look around you, anywhere you are in the world. Look up from your own phone and notice how many people are on their phones. And phones are fantastic if you need to use a phone. What I'm talking about is using the phone in a moment where I don't really need to use the phone, I'm just checking it. And so instead of checking your phone, I'm going to teach your listeners and you a little technique.
Okay.
Right? And so first you have to catch yourself. Like, oh, I'm just checking Facebook for the 40th time in the last 2 hours. Right? There you go.
I do have my phone.
All right, let me have it here. All right, so I'm like looking down at my phone, and I'm like, oh, I'm doing that thing. You have to be the detective. You have to notice you're doing it. And then what you want to do is you want to turn the phone over and look up and just look around. And so the question is, what do you see? So, you guys listening right now, and even if you're driving, you can just open your gaze and say, what do you see? And you just take in that information. And what happens is that very quickly you begin to open to the world around you, and your attention is drawn naturally to something as opposed to trying to focus on something, right? Because one of the interesting things about a flow state is you can't try to be in flow. Right? An athlete can't try to be in the zone. An artist can't try to come up with a great idea. In fact, no one can try to come up with a great idea. It's why nobody fills in the blank of the phrase, I think of my best ideas when, with the phrase, when I'm trying to think of them. Right? Creativity is a flow state.
Right.
And so when you find yourself catching yourself looking at your phone, then just turn it down, look up, and look around you. And the question is, well, what do you see? And you'll start to be drawn to this or that. And then the question becomes a very subtle one, like, what is the faintest shadow you can detect? What is the subtlest play of light off the surface of an object? And it's a really fantastic little exercise. We teach it to our kids around the dinner table as a game. Because the truth is that wherever you are, there is always something to see. Always something to see, even in the dullest conference room, right? There's shadow, there's light, there's other people's expressions. And it's a really simple way of grounding yourself back in the flow of the actual present moment that you're actually in, as opposed to distracting yourself with the world of your phone. Because phones are fantastic, but no screen, even the megapixel, phablets, I guess we call them, screen is as big as the world.
Right.
And so just that little exercise, you might do it 20 times a day, you might do it 10 times a day, you might do it 15, 100 times a day, depending upon how often you check your phone. But every time you look at the world around you, within a second or two, 3, 4 seconds, you ground yourself back in the flow of the present moment. And from that more grounded place, then it's easier to take whatever your next best step forward is. Right. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, one of the things I just kind of came up with when you said that is like there's no experience on your phone that replaces the experience of what's around you in real life. And I think oftentimes what's on our phone is not necessarily real life. It's a part of life, but what we experience around us is actually real life. And if we're not present, we don't ever see what's going on around us, and we kind of tune into this one-dimensional world from our phone.
Yeah, and you could get hit by a car.
Yeah.
I do that because I'm a dad, you're a dad too, right?
Yeah.
So I see people in San Francisco where I live basically staring at their phones as they're crossing the street, and I usually say something like, your mom would be upset with you.
Yeah.
Right? And people are like, what? Who? Look, don't be... And so, but the truth is, hey, we're both dads too, and we travel.
Right.
There's an amazing real life moment, present moment connection that you can have when you're FaceTiming your kid or your wife. Like that is being in the real world. That's a use of the phone that is in itself a flow experience, real present moment awareness. I'm talking about the other times when you're just checking your phone or reading email as you're walking across the street, or scanning through SportsCenter when you're eating. It's like if you're scanning through SportsCenter when you're eating, you're absolutely having a degraded experience of whatever it is you're tasting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
one of the things that we do, that I do in Habit-Based Lifestyle, one of the first things that I have people do is they have to do a phone check. And I don't know if you've seen this or not, but if you scroll all the way over on your iPhone to the left, you will actually see how much you're on your phone every day. And then what I make people do is for that whole week, they take an average of how much they're on their phone per day, and they times that by 30 days, and they times it by 90 days. And so we figure out all the people that have the excuse of, I don't have time. We figure out in the first week how much extra time would they have if they cut their phone use. And I don't do it in the way of like, hey, you have to be on your phone for this amount of time. I say, listen, if you're on your phone 6 hours a day, over the next 30 days, you're going to be on your phone 180 hours. Decide what's for work, decide what's for pleasure, and then get rid of anything else. And so for a lot of people, let's just think about 180 hours is basically... what is that? 7 days?
Yeah, that's a lot of time.
Yeah, so I say, listen, imagine this. For the next 30 days, you're going to you're not going to use your phone at all. And then the last 7 days of the month, you're going to just get on your phone and you're going to sit there. And you're going to sit there for 7 days. You're not going to do anything else.
I love that framing. Yeah.
And imagine you doing that, and they're like, my gosh, like that's ridiculous. And I'm like, but that's what you're doing every single day on your phone.
Yeah.
And imagine how much different your life would be. And so I say, okay, what time do you want to buy back in that? And most people, they'll say things like, well, I want 2 hours back. And so 2 hours back really gives them, 3 days back over the month. If you're talking about 108, or if you're talking about 90 days, now you're talking about almost like 2 weeks back of their life.
Yeah.
Which is huge. But we don't ever stop and look at that. And I always think about this is like every time I look at my phone, my energy is going to my phone instead of going to where I want to direct it. And so, we talk about creativity. We talk about being present. If my energy is not in the present moment, it's in my phone, it's in all these other things that I'm giving it away to. And I think that's something that I've really came away with, this doing versus being, is, I can do a lot of things every day, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm being. And when I check my phone often, I get in this habit of, okay, now I'm starting to do and multitask and spread my energy out all over the place. And I don't ever really come back to the present moment. Yeah.
And well, I think that's a really important point, because really the thing that determines the quality of your experience is the quality of your attention. And it determines the effectiveness with which you do everything. Yeah. Because really, as again, we're talking about combining doing and being. We're not talking about doing nothing. This is a really important point I want to make. I'm not an advocate for going off into the woods and being in silence for a year. I want people to develop the capacity to be more present for everything they're doing, because here's the big secret. If you want to do a good job at something, be present. If you want to enjoy something, be present. You cannot be a good listener, a good lover, a good chef, a good anything if you're not present. However, we all know that you can get a lot done and not be present. multitasking we talked about.
Yeah.
I think that it's an interesting thing. We always look back at previous generations with some degree of ridicule. Like, oh, God, you guys were such idiots back then. My father was part of the cocktail generation. It's one of the reasons, I guess, he became an alcoholic for a while and then became sober at about 46. But, there was a time in American history where if you were throwing a party and someone was leaving your party, it was rude of you not to go, oh, man, you're leaving? Hey, one for the road?
Yeah.
Like, are you not drunk enough to drive? Like, before you get in your non-seatbelt metal dash station wagon, have another shot or another beer. Like, it's ridiculous. I think that we're going to look back at this time and go, wait. You thought doing 2 or 3 things at the same time was good?
Right. Yeah, we're going to be like, hey, I used to be able to be on my phone, answering another call while at the same time checking email and checking
eating.
Facebook and eating.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you thought that was good. And what I have found, having cultivated a daily meditation practice, is I do have the time to do it. Everyone has the time to do it.
Sure.
And part of the reason I have time to do it is it makes time. I spend so much less time getting frustrated. I spend so much less time mopping up after things I have to apologize for. I spend so much less time correcting mistakes. I break way fewer dishes now doing the dishes than I used to before I meditated.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is simply quality of attention. It's because you can actually do what you're doing, and if you do what you're doing, you do it better and faster. When you're in a flow state, you can learn a language in 3 weeks as opposed to 6 months. When you're in a flow state, you can essentially do a better job at everything. I think of meditation as a hack. It's the simplest way I know to cultivate my ability to be more present, and in being more present, be more effective in whatever I'm doing.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that I also want to talk about is like where we 20 years ago you started meditating, and then one of the things that I heard you talk about in your course that you did was you went for 4 months and studied meditation, this specific type of meditation. But what was that like? Well,
back up for a minute, because guided meditations are this crazy thing that now have convinced anyone with a nice voice that they can be a meditation teacher. Right? So you have a nice voice and you can say, imagine your heart chakra, Om, deep breath in, Om. Like, you can be a guided meditation teacher. I had to do quite a bit of training. When I got the crazy idea to be a meditation teacher, it was ridiculous. I was cleaning one of my bicycles and this idea popped in my head, said, you should be a meditation teacher. And I laughed out loud. And I told my wife and she thought it was hilarious. But I kind of went with it. And I did about a year's worth of study in the philosophy, you would say, that the practice springs from. So it would be a philosophy of what we call Advaita Vedanta, meaning it's a philosophical tradition that comes from India, or what we now call India, from the East. And that was a knowledge course that took about a year to accomplish, maybe a little longer than that. And then that qualified me to go on an immersive sort of experience of being in India for almost 4 months. There was a 10-day program that my wife and we took our 4.5-year-old son, Logan. We had one son then, now we have 2. And we took him with us, and then that was a 10-day thing, and then they left, and I stayed for another 3 months, 3.5 months.
Wow.
And it was this crazy immersive experience, meditating for 12, 14 hours a day, learning some things in Sanskrit, learning some of the deeper spiritual traditions and techniques that are underneath this practice. Absolutely none of which you have to know about or do to practice the technique effectively.
Right.
But if you're going to teach it, you should
know it.
Right. So yeah, that was insane.
Yeah, so like talk about what that's like, because I think I've heard people, even people that I coach, they've wanted to say, okay, I want to be able to meditate for 24 hours, a 24-hour period. And I'm like, well, why do you want to do that?
Yeah, exactly.
And they're like, well, I want to be connected. And I'm like, well, what if you could be connected for an hour and you wouldn't need the 24 hours? But what is that like to, especially like your first few times when you're like, what the hell is this? But like, is it something that they work you up to? Or is it something that they're like, hey, we're going to meditate for 14 hours and you can't move?
Well, you can move. There were little movement breaks in between. So the truth about the training is that it was kind of like officer training. It was a curriculum that was designed to break you down.
Okay.
And so part of it was you didn't know what was going to happen. So they didn't really ease you into it, or if they said they were going to ease you into it, then they'd be like, yeah, no, we're not easing you anymore. We're just going to do it. So it was kind of to create that lack of stability. It was kind of to have you fall through whatever false floor you were currently standing on.
Okay.
So that the ground you ended up standing on was much more firm.
Okay.
Yeah, it was insane. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but for the people that you're talking about who go, like, I want to go meditate for 24 hours, or I'm going to leap into meditation, I'm going to do a 7-day silence retreat. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing a 7-day silence retreat. They're amazing experiences. But I think what drives a lot of people who take that approach is we're part of this gonzo culture, right? Mm-hmm. We want to just, not only do we want to do things, we want to optimize it. We want to crush it.
Right.
And I think that what's interesting about developing a daily meditation practice is that a daily practice of anything is going to be ultimately much, much more powerful than any short-term transformative experience.
Right.
It's why your podcast is called the Habit-Based Lifestyle, not the Peak Experience Lifestyle.
Yeah, consistency.
Yeah, it's because, I mean, we've all had experiences of like reading a book or going to a workshop that, this changed my life. And then 2 weeks later, your life is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Right? It's because you haven't changed anything about the underlying structure of the way you live your life or of the consciousness through which you experience your life.
Right.
And so I think there's nothing wrong with peak experiences. Much more powerful, much more valuable are transformative practices. In fact, that's that thing about accessibility that I was talking about. Most of what we think about as meditation comes to us from, you would consider, a monastic tradition, from, which is why we go to Zen centers and places like that, and learn from people who might be a priest or a monk. And there's a lot we can learn from those people, but the truth is that that's not my life. Like, I went on a 7-day silence retreat, and that was a really hard practice to bring home. Right? What I want to teach people is a way of meditating that they can absolutely make part of their noisy, busy, chaotic life, because that's where it's most useful. I meditate in the middle of an incredibly noisy house every morning. We have 2 boys. We know what that's like, right?
Yeah.
And a dog that runs around barking, chasing them around, and I meditate in that. I was reading a mindfulness book a while back, and it's a really good book. It says a lot of really interesting things about the nature of the mind and consciousness. But one of the very first instructions was try to meditate at the same time every morning. And I thought, well, there goes 80% of parents I know,
yeah.
Right? And there's this way of saying, well, if you can sit like this, and we all know when I say like this, that classic meditator position. But if you can't yet, you'll get better at it. And there's all these ways in which these practices are taught that I think are a little patronizing.
Right.
And what happens is that because we're trained to be doers and achievers and to measure our self-worth by how well we do something, we don't respond very well if we don't think we're going to be able to do it well. Not a lot of people persist in something they think they're not going to achieve.
Right.
And so the idea is like, well, I can't meditate every day, so I'm not going to get the most out of it, so I might as well not do it. Or if I can't sit and control my mind for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes, then what's the point? When they say a single breath can be meditation, that's a little patronizing, right? It's sort of like if you were, had a gym. I mean, imagine if you told people like, okay, just do 1 push-up. 1 push-up it's like, come on, man, can I do more than that?
Yeah.
And I think that there's this idea that I have to do it right, I have to do it perfectly, my life has to be structured in a way to allow it, and all of those things stand in the way of becoming a daily meditator. And so what I try to do is just wipe all those off the table. Like, you can. Yeah,
like kind of the way you're describing meditation reminds me of like organized religion. It's like if I don't do things and check the box along the way, then I'm really not meditating. And I remember the first person who taught me how to meditate, they said, hey, the only type of wrong meditation is no meditation, which opened me up to begin to exploring meditation. And I think of like organized religion is kind of put these things, hey, if you don't do these things a certain way, then you're not in this category, and you're not good, you're bad. And so, with meditation is, in some ways I feel like it's teaching us to do things a certain way. And really what I've been learning about meditation is it's opening us up to a new possibility to discover, what's really out there in the world and what's really inside of us. And that's kind of the way I like to think of where I'm at with meditation now.
Yeah.
And, also for people out there who may be listening, it's like, what I'm really getting is you're saying, listen, it's better for you to consistently do this than it is to go away, for a week or to go away for 5 days. It's because if you don't keep up with the practice after that, then you really didn't gain anything.
It's not that you didn't gain anything. So let's you haven't gained what's really possible for you to gain.
Right.
And so, I meet a lot of people who want meditation experiences. I meet a lot of people who meditate when they're really stressed, which is sort of like using meditation as that floaty thing the lifeguard tosses you when you're drowning. And there's nothing wrong with being tossed a floaty thing when you're drowning. Learning to meditate and doing it daily is learning how to swim, so you don't need the floaty thing. But again, back to those types of meditation, I think all types of meditation are effective and useful. There's just a way of understanding how they could work together. Like, I don't see any competition between different types of meditation. And you can think of it in terms of physical fitness. Like, we were talking about that in the gym this morning.
Yeah.
That there's an approach to meditation, this allowing approach of where you're letting the mind flow, where you're not doing quite so much or doing as little as possible and grounding yourself in being. I think of that as core work, because at our core, we're an experience of being. And if you can firm up that core, then everything you want to build on top of that is going to be more stable. Like in physical fitness, if you work on your abs and lower back, then your Turkish get-up is better, then your deadlift is better, then all things are better, right? But if you start working on the get-up, if you start working on curls, if you start working on those things and ignore the core, then it's not going to be as effective.
Yeah, the foundation you're building is weak versus, the foundation of the core is strong and we build from there.
Yeah.
Let's kind of change directions. Let's talk about, you have 2 boys.
Yeah.
You're married.
Uh-huh.
So how has meditation, number one, helped you with your kids? Do you teach your kids? And then how did you have a really cool story about how you ended up with 2 boys and married. Maybe touch on that a little bit first, and then we'll go into, do you teach your kids how to meditate, and, do they meditate?
So, yeah, both my boys know how to meditate. They both have a mantra. They both know how to use it. I don't force them to meditate. Mostly they can see us doing it. We're modeling the behavior, and that's important.
Sure.
Joshua, our youngest, will come in and meditate with us for a couple of minutes, and then he'll bounce out. Logan, the 12-year-old, has now started meditating before games. We'll be driving to a soccer game or a rugby game or something, and he'll meditate in the car. And then he meditates, and this is a great example of nesting those kinds of practices. He'll do this grounding flow approach to meditation, and then he'll do 5 minutes of visualization.
Awesome.
Like, what are you working on stiff arming people? Are you working on tackling with your right shoulder as opposed to your left shoulder? And so he'll do visualization. And so he uses it more. Joshua apparently is a master meditator, because the other day I said, "Hey, Joshua, do you want to meditate?" And he said, "Oh, I already did." I go, "When? You were just throwing Legos at Logan." He goes, "Yeah, that's when I was meditating."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, I bow to you, guru," right? So they both know how to meditate. They see us doing it. I think they have that muscle memory, and they can use it as they see fit in their life.
Sure. Yeah, that's cool. So how did you have 2 adopted kids?
Yeah, both our boys are, that's the funny thing about being James Brown, is not only am I the white James Brown, both my kids are African American, and we adopted them both. And so they'll say, "My dad's James Brown," and then I show up to pick them up, and people are like, "Oh, are you a social worker?" And I'm like, "No, they're adopted." And people just apologize profusely. We tried having kids. A lot of people think that we adopted to be nice people. We did not try to be nice people. We wanted the full experience. We did open adoption, which is a kind of new paradigm of adoption where you know everyone and are encouraged to tell your kids that they're adopted and have contact with the birth families if that's healthy and allowed. And we have great relationships with our birth families. So my kids grow up knowing their story, knowing why they were adopted, why they were put up for adoption, and eliminating all of those dark clouds of secrecy that normally are part of that. I think it's fantastic. It's not for everyone, but I think it's for more people than think it is. But yeah, we went through that process and ended up adopting. Yeah, it's
Yeah, that's really cool. And
yeah.
the fact that what I really hear is like, hey, they know the truth. And when they know the truth, for them, they can, there's no doubt in their mind that they're loved not only by you, but, where they came from. And I think, for a lot of probably adopted kids, that's what they go through the majority of their life, really feeling like, if they don't know.
Yeah. Well, there's open adoption was developed for one very powerful reason, is they noticed that when people didn't know something, they tended to fill those vacant spaces with negative thoughts.
Right.
Right. And so adoptive kids grew up wondering why maybe I wasn't loved, and maybe I'm not lovable, maybe I don't deserve love, and there's all those things. But a lot of the focus on opening things up is for the benefit of the kids. I think there's an enormous benefit to the parents, because most adoptive parents live in some degree of secret fear of the day their kid comes to them and says, I want to meet my real mom.
Yeah.
Like I want to meet, exactly.
Guilt and shame.
Yeah, and we don't have to deal with that at all. Like we don't, oh yeah, well you met her. She was over at our house last August, right? Yeah, or you were friends with them on Facebook. You see how they're growing up. And so we don't have to live with that fear. The other thing I think that open adoption allows for is it's a really humane way of treating birth families.
Right.
Like Tiffany and Jessica, our two birth moms, their first choice as a mom was choosing the couple that was going to adopt their child.
Wow, that's really cool.
Really empowering.
Yeah.
And I think that can't be understated. Like rather than just throw the baby into the ether and wonder what happened, they're like, no, those people. And I want this degree of contact with them. And it's a very empowering thing. I think it's the first time I heard about open adoption, I said, that's what we're doing. Well, it seems so much more human.
What I really see is even if kids aren't adopted, there's still maybe this question of being loved and being this other thing based on the truth. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that has kind of been left out of a lot of conversations in the world today is, maybe adoption is a hard thing to talk about with your kids, love and all these things, but being open about it, it gets you to this place of there's no doubt in the kid's mind, and then it also gets rid of guilt and shame for both sides. And I think that's something that even people who are married that still raise their kids, is kids still wonder, hey, am I loved? Do my parents really support me? And then I think parents also kind of go into this place of guilt and shame that robs us of actually the experience with our kids. And so just to hear you talk about that, I'm like, man, there's open adoption, but there's also open parenting.
Yeah.
And I think that is super important too.
Well, and I think it comes with, being open. I mean, I'm not here to slam my parents or anything. They grew up at a different time. I think that you wouldn't be human if you didn't think that your parents messed something up.
Right.
But, my parents grew up in an age where you didn't really have those open conversations necessarily with kids. I remember a few times my parents had a very difficult relationship. They fought all the time. And I remember asking my dad once, are you mad at mommy? And he's like, no. And I was like, oh, that's weird because you look really mad.
Right.
Right. And so there's this cognitive dissonance like, that's like, oh, they're not mad. Like now when my wife and I fight and we both meditate, but we still have arguments, it's hard raising kids. My kids are like, are you mad at daddy? And my wife will like, yes, but we're using our words.
Right.
Like, something daddy said, yes. And so I think that it's really good for them to see, it's good for them to see affection. It's good for them to see conflict. It's good for kids to see that conflict can be resolved.
Right.
And it's just being open like that. And it's also, we were talking about podcasts. I'm stunned at the depth of understanding my 11-year-old. When he was 11, now he's 12, almost 13. The kinds of concepts he can entertain and philosophical ideas. And he's not that brainy a kid, but I think you can talk to kids like adults, basically. You don't have to talk to them like kids.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think kids pick up on the energy. So you could say like, hey, we're not fighting, but they pick up on the energy and the feeling of the anger, the frustration. And so it's not even really about what you say. It's the energy that you're bringing into the home. And I think the power of a family and the power of even as a couple is being truthful about the energy that you're carrying into your home, whether it is anger or frustration or, even the other side of like being happy and these things. And so I grew up the same way. My parents, it was like, in some ways we kind of projected that, hey, everything was perfect. No one was fighting, no one was arguing. Mm-hmm. And then it was almost like when fighting or arguing did happen, it was bad. Mm-hmm. And if it was bad, then that meant nothing was good. And so it was kind of this weird place of just, perfection. And even today, like it carries over into my life at times where I have to catch myself. I'm like, shit, am I like falling into this perfection loop of wanting everything to be perfect and sweep it under the rug and pretend it is? Or am I going to admit what happened? Like I could even think last night my son's got a baseball game and I can tell he's just out of sync. He's been working really hard at batting. He gets up to bat. It's like he didn't even want to be there. And he's been working really hard on it. It's his first playoff game. And then they have this other pitcher come in. He's pitching, like the kid's pitching pretty fast, but he's faced him throughout the year. And all of a sudden his knee hurts. Yeah. And I'm like, dude, really? Your knee hurts? Yeah. Like, why don't you be honest?
It's a flight response.
Yeah, I kind of gave him a hard time and said, you've been working really hard at this. Like, let's just go up and relax. And then I wake up this morning and I'm like, what an idiot I am. Like I'm basically saying go up and relax, except I'm putting more pressure on him. And what could I have changed in my approach? And so I really started to think about that. And I left him a message this morning and I said, hey, listen, like, I want you to know that, number one, like I'm your dad. I'm not your coach. I'm not any of those things. But number two is I want you to do your best when you go up at whatever that means for you. Yeah. And I don't want to put extra pressure on you as your dad. And his big thing was he was afraid to strike out. Mm-hmm. And I said, like, man, it's one thing for me to say, well, why are you afraid to strike out? But it's like, well, where in my life am I afraid to strike out? Yeah. And so I started thinking about, okay, well, what about starting a new business? What about moving here? And I'm like, well, no wonder it triggered me. Because like I have this same fear, maybe not in baseball, but other areas. And so it really made me reflect this morning on, hey, how am I showing up as a father when I'm like telling him not to be afraid, yet if we turn the table on business or other things, here's this fear that pops up, this same fear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's one of the, if you parent honestly and if you live openly and honestly, you have to come to some pretty powerful and humbling understandings about life. And that is that, look, adults don't have it all figured out. We tell our kids to, not give into peer pressure. Like we're better at it. Right. Like, I mean, 3/4 of the RVs that are owned by old couples in this country are because, well, the Hendersons got one. Yeah. I mean, that's what we call peer pressure? We call peer pressure as adults brand consciousness. Yeah. It's just peer pressure. We're not better at resisting it than kids are. Right. We don't have it all figured out. And I think it's really great of you to acknowledge that mistake. Like I was talking about the phone. When we got Logan a phone, I said, look, I'm not going to have you be addicted to your phone and I'm going to bust you on it when I see you. But you also have the right to bust me. Yeah. Like you can call me out on stuff too, because I'm not perfect at this. And I think that's the thing. If you go into parenting with your kids as I'm not the ultimate authority, I don't know absolutely what's best for you. I have my ideas, but I could be wrong. And you just move through like that. Like we leave our kids notes. Yeah. Like at night because they go to bed. Thank God they still go to bed earlier than us. We'll leave notes. And so they can see a note when they get up in the morning, like, hey, I think I overreacted in this way. Do you want to talk about it? I think you're a great kid. I think it's exactly like I'm not better necessarily at all the things I'm teaching my son about. Right.
And I, like we have Marco Polo with my son. I don't know if you know what that is, but I'll Marco Polo him. It's an app where it's
I don't have the app.
It's kind of like FaceTime, but you just can't do it at the same time. So it'd be like I'd leave him a video, he'll watch it and leave me one back.
Oh, cool! I'll try that.
But it's a cool way to communicate. And then there's this barrier for him to kind of think about it. And then there's a barrier for me to be like, "Hi, man, you were an idiot last night. Like, let's really reframe this." But the cool thing is, hey, I get to look at that and be like, man, I screwed up. But like, how can I work through this and make it a positive experience for my son? And number one is admitting the truth. Like, the truth is, hey, I don't know what you were feeling. You know, I know you were maybe a little bit scared just to strike out, and that's okay. Like, but how can you use that fear next time to work through that and really step into it? And I think that's what's powerful. But our kids teach us so much about life if we're present enough to actually sit there and listen.
Yeah, because I think kids, the way we learn, whether we're a kid or a parent, is by coming to a situation, whether it's a new situation or more frequently a situation we've had a lot, but we look at it in a new way.
Yeah.
And I think that kids are absolutely a lens through which we can re-experience most of the situations in our life through a new lens. And that's what I get out of parenting. I mean, I love being a dad. I wasn't the greatest dad for the first year of my son's life. Led me to meditation. But I think that's what it's about. It's a really engaging process, like being a parent.
Do you think that that meditation does this also, like, in a sense? Because one of the things that I did this morning is I have this daily frame where I'll kind of ask myself these questions. And, you know, it's like, hey, what are the facts of the situation? How did this make you feel? What was the story you were telling yourself? And then, like, how can we change this story and really get to the root of what was really going on? And so as I went through this, I kind of stopped at the end and I just sat there and meditated for a couple minutes and really just kind of went through the process of this. But what came to me was, you know, just the stuff that I shared. But I felt like I got into this maybe flow, which we talk about, and just this stuff came to me. But do things like that come to you in meditation, or do you find that?
Well, yeah. So a lot of things pop up in meditation. Sometimes I'll get insights into relationship issues or business issues. And when that happens, I write them down. Like I meditate with a notepad next to me, and I think one of the things that I'm doing in meditation is making myself available to that layer of consciousness from which insight and creativity arises. And so when something really interesting pops in, I stop, I write it down, and I go back to meditating. It seems to me to dishonor the process if I'm like, oh, that's a fantastic idea, but I'm meditating.
Right.
It's like, okay, I'll meditate again tomorrow or later today. But I think what mostly meditation does is a couple of very powerful things. A, it grounds me in something deeper than my to-do list. I'm still a very busy person. I do a lot, but it's nice to have that grounding in being, because being is the source of thinking, and thinking is the source of action. And so being grounded in being does that. The other thing that meditation does is it helps strip away some of the stress that we accumulate. Meditation is really good at relieving stress. And the other thing, and this is maybe the most colloquial way in which people can appreciate the benefits of meditation and how it helps you show up in life better.
Okay.
Right? And there's a guy named Hans Selye, and he was a researcher in the 30s and 40s, a stress researcher. And he came up with this idea that he called adaptation energy. And because he noticed himself, he said, look, why is it that on some days my lab assistant is more annoying than other days? Why some days does traffic bug the shit out of me, and other days I'm like, oh well, I'm going to be late today? Why some days is it, your kid knocking a glass of milk off the table is like, oh, and other days it's like, oopsie, let's clean that up. Like, these were the same stressors from an objective scientific standpoint. He didn't understand why he didn't have the same stress response. Like a chair doesn't have a bad day on which a fat person sitting in it bothers it more.
Right.
But the people sitting in chairs do. Like, we have bad days and better days.
Sure.
Why is that?
Or driving down the road.
Yeah, exactly. And so he had this beautiful concept he called adaptation energy. And he said that, look, we have these busy lives. We're full of all this contact with all these stressed out people. We might be stressed ourselves. And in our life, we're presented time and time again with an opportunity, a challenge to adapt. We have these ideas about how things should be, how we wish things would go, and they're very often not that way. And so we have to adapt. And when we're full of adaptation energy, we can do that with a sense of humor, with equanimity, with inventiveness, right? We can have an adaptive response to life, an interactive response to life. He said, as we drain ourselves of that energy because we're working too hard, we're not sleeping well, we're eating and working at the same time, we're basically draining our batteries. When we're getting stressed out, it's really fatiguing, it drains us, we get fried and frazzled, and when we're in that state, we literally have less capacity to meet an ordinary life demand, like an exit being closed or them being out of your favorite sandwich at the deli, in an interactive, adaptive way, and we tend to react.
Right.
And when we react, it's fight or flight. And it's the difference between, hey, honey, can I talk to you a second? You're like, no, can't you see I'm working? Jesus, I'm working. Can't you see it? And, hey, can I talk to you for a second? You're like, oh, babe, I'm working right now. Can you give me 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Right? What's the difference? The difference is not the demand being placed on you. It's your capacity to adapt. And in my experience, both as a meditator and as a teacher, that is the biggest benefit I get from having a twice daily practice is it fills me up with adaptation energy. Right? I develop some perspective. I expand my awareness. I can be more present. If I'm more present, I can have a better reaction. And really, I just build up my capacity. And in fact, when I went off to do that teacher training that I talked about, that 4-month immersion, my best friend took me to a baseball game as an intervention. He's like, dude, you're 51 or 50. You're going to go be a meditation teacher? You're going to, this is the worst midlife crisis ever. He said, just go to Burning Man with me again. Yeah. And I'm like, no, well, this works for me. And he says, what do you mean? I said, well, I apologize less. He's like, oh, that'd be nice. I said, I sleep better. He goes, that'd be nice. And I said, and I have about 90% less brain chatter.
Right.
He said, oh, that'd be nice. And they're all nice, right? The first two I put down to having less stress. Because when you're less stressed, you're just less likely to throw or drink or buy or say that thing that you have to apologize for.
Yeah.
You can handle your business, basically. You can bring more of your best self to more of your life, and it's not an effort to do so. The second one about better sleep is also stress related because when people are stressed, they get tired, they have coffee in the middle of the day, they have sugary snacks, they jack themselves up with dopamine, they watch screens late into the evening to distract themselves from their negative thoughts, they absorb themselves in the latest, binge show, which is a fantastic thing. I love binge watching with my wife, but I know why people do it late into the evening. And so if you meditate on a daily basis, you just aren't as stressed. And if you're not as stressed, you don't have as much coffee and you don't have a glass of wine to take the edge off. And then the glass of wine has a glass of wine. And then, right, so those things I put down to stress. The other part about just 90% less brain chatter, that's also stress related, but really that's just about expanding awareness, being more present, being more in flow. And when you're in that state, you just have fewer thoughts. You're just less worry, less anxiety. You're more in life and less stuck in your head, commenting on your life, judging your life. Those three things together are why I think meditation is an essential tool if you want to be the best dad you can be, if you want to be the best entrepreneur. A lot of people think that if I want to be the best entrepreneur, I have to optimize this and do that in my business. Or if I want to be the best parent, I have to take my kids here and then take my kids there and then make this. It's like, no, what anything we're doing in life needs of us most is us to be the best version of ourselves.
Sure.
And,
so let's talk about when's the best time that you've found from your experience to meditate?
I like meditating first thing when I get up. I get up, I splash a little water on my face, I use the restroom, I do a couple of stretches, and then I get back in bed or I sit in a comfortable chair and I meditate for about 20 minutes.
Okay.
I would say 10 to 20 minutes. In the technique that I teach, I wouldn't meditate for less than 10 minutes, but the beauty of it is 10 minutes actually goes by pretty quickly. It's fairly easy to do.
Yeah.
Then I think the second best time to meditate is in the middle of the day when the day has started to wear you out, because I think that's the secret truth of our society is that the day wears people out.
Right.
I teach a lot in companies, and what HR people are really concerned about is work stress going home, because when work stress goes home stress comes to work. And so meditating at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, at 2:30, when you would normally feel that need for coffee to push you past that point of fatigue, that is, I think, the best time to meditate. Because you do a couple of very powerful things. You close your eyes, you disconnect from your devices, and you just shut off all those useless browser windows in your brain, all those things that are clogging up your CPU. You get a deep level of rest. You help release some stress, launder your system of some of that stress chemistry, replace it with a little bliss chemistry, and then you come out of meditation with clarity, with some capacity, with some energy. And who says, I like my evening commute? Who says I'm at my most creative and collaborative at 5 o'clock? People who meditate at 3.
Yeah.
So it's a way of unfrying yourself. A lot of people I know use meditation right before they go to bed. I go, what a waste.
Yeah, because you fall asleep most of the time.
Well, not only do you fall asleep, but I want to bring my best self home to my wife and kids.
Right.
So rather than get home and then say, hey, everyone shut up so I can meditate. Like, no, I'll meditate. I'll sit in my car before I get home.
Right.
I'll drive and park 2 blocks away from my house and meditate.
I remember coaching some guys about 2.5 years ago, and we're on a call, and they're like, yeah, my wife's pissed when I get home. My kids are out of control. I'm just reacting. And so we came up with this thing. It was called Dad Sets the Tone when he gets home. And so on their way home, what we did is for 30 days, we would pull over on our way home for 5 to 10 minutes and either do, just some breath work, or we would just, I guess it would be called meditate, our version of meditation, but it would be picturing, envisioning what we were actually going to do when we get home, and how we were going to act, how we were going to react. And I remember just how much more present I was when I got home, and how much different the energy was when I got home versus not doing that. And so for 30 days we did this, and guys were like, man, my wife is asking me what the hell happened to me. And I'm like, yeah, me too. And so it was like every week we're coming back and we're
That's
like,
beautiful.
My wife's telling me I'm changing and all these things more than anything else. And all it was just pulling over for 5-10 minutes and doing exactly what you said.
Yeah. It's amazing how, what's the way I want to put it? So we all know that there are these simple things that we can do, or if we don't know, it's easy to discover the truth of them.
Right.
What I think you're up against is the truth and the power of those kinds of practices is up against this social programming that we're supposed to be so freaking busy all the time.
Yeah.
And in fact, I taught a guy to meditate. He's a financial analyst, and he worked for a pretty progressive company that even had a meditation room. And so he would make meditation part of his day. He would meditate at 3 o'clock, 3:30 or so. He stopped drinking coffee in the afternoon, so his sleep started improving. And then he went to another company. There's more old school. They weren't really into this meditation shit. And so he did this really ingenious thing, is he bought a pack of cigarettes. And he took a few cigarettes out so it looked a little crumpled. And every day at 3 o'clock, he would grab the cigarettes and hold it up in his hand and just nod like, hey, taking a smoke break. And they were cool with that.
Okay.
And he would basically go walk across the street to the hotel and sit in their lobby and meditate.
Oh, wow.
And then he would come back and he'd be refreshed and and I just think it's so ironic that this is a society that will give you a break to kill yourself.
Yeah, but not to...
not to improve yourself, not to improve your health. Like, that seems like doing nothing.
Wow.
Like, in fact, that's one of the things I work against, is this notion that, oh, I see you have time to do nothing. It's like, no, meditation is not doing nothing. If you look at all that's happening in the physiology, if you look at all that's happening in consciousness, if you look at what's happening in releasing stress, there's a whole lot happening when we meditate. It just doesn't show up as a billable hour. So It seems like you're doing nothing.
Yeah. And, what I think, too, is, like, think about it. You smoke, you come in, you smell, okay? No matter how much cologne or breath stuff you put on, you stink. Everybody notices you, and it distracts everyone else. If you just came in meditation, you'd come in with a different state of energy that people would actually be attracted to, instead of, wanting to go the opposite way when you come in smoking a cigarette.
Yeah.
Kind of the idea along this is like, hey, choose meditation, not sedation.
Yeah.
And I think
not medication, because caffeine is a medication.
Yeah. And so, I think a cool thing to think of is for people, there's lots of people who, I guess everybody sedates to some extent, whether it's your iPhone, whether it's cigarettes, tobacco, There's porn. There's all kinds of stuff out there. Shopping. Yeah, scrolling
social
on social
media. Yeah.
That we sedate on. And if we just took that amount of time to choose something different, and I like to think of this as kind of the habit loop, is we're not going to probably change the trigger or the cue. We're not going to change the craving. But what we can do is change the routine. And instead of grabbing a cigarette, instead of, maybe grabbing a snack or grabbing something we're normally programmed to do, like our phone, what if we just sat there for a few minutes and meditated? Like, how much different would our life be?
Hugely different. So when I learned to meditate, differences started showing up right away, but I wasn't the one to notice them. My wife was the one to start noticing that I was handling things differently.
Right.
And in fact, it has to do with, like, we were talking about driving.
Yeah.
Like, every city in America, there are more fatal car crashes on the commute home than the commute to work. Wow. And it's not because the light is in someone's eyes. It's because people are fried. Yeah. And when they're fried, they're more aggressive. They're quicker to anger. They don't make as good decisions. And when I started meditating, my wife and I learned together. About 2 weeks into meditating, we started going on dates again. We weren't getting along when we learned to meditate. And this guy cut me off in traffic, and I was like very violent lane change he did, so swerved in. I had to swerve out of the way. I had to kind of tap my brakes, and then we just proceeded. And about 10 seconds after that happened, my wife looked at me and goes, "Well, that's better." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, you didn't like flip him off or honk your horn or try to chase him down." And I'm like, "Oh, really?" She goes, "Yeah, you're kind of an asshole driver." And I was like, "Oh." And what's interesting about that is that I still drive much more quickly than my wife.
Yeah.
My sons are like, "You drive faster than Mom." And I go, "Yes, I do." But I no longer drive with aggression. Yeah. Like, I was a guy, man. Like, that was part of my guyness, right? I was a good driver and don't get in my way. That's my lane.
You're going to flip everybody off.
Yeah, and
cut you off.
Yeah, and it's like, so it's really interesting, all the subtle ways in which meditation changes you. And what I think is I meet a lot of people who go, "Look, I don't want to lose my edge, or I don't want to be a different person." And the edge part comes from people mistakenly thinking that stress is their edge, that stress sharpens you. I go, no, stress dulls you. Chronic stress dulls you. Meditation actually is what sharpens you, makes you more present, more available, more open, more perceptive. But that thing about not changing, I think what's really interesting about becoming a daily meditator is I just feel like I'm more my authentic self.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Like, a lot of the stuff that I thought of myself as, like an asshole driver, as it turns out, that's not me. I still like driving and I still drive fast, but I'm not an asshole. Certain friendships, certain habits have fallen away and have been replaced by habits and friendships that are more in line with who I am as a person. Wow. So we absolutely change, but the change is towards being the more authentic version of us.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. Yeah, and I've, for what I've known and what I've practiced for probably the last 4.5 years, my addictions have, I've, been addicted to chew, smokeless tobacco for 26 years. I stopped that. Cold turkey. I started doing push-ups every time I craved to chew. And I quit cold turkey after like 3 weeks. After 26 years and trying all these things, I've quit coffee. And I think I've quit because I've realized what I was actually doing. I was suppressing a feeling. And instead of doing that, I found that meditation is a place I can go to kind of feel it, acknowledge it, and just let it go. And I don't think if I would have been practicing this, consistency of meditation, I wouldn't have been able to get to that place and realize a lot of these things. So, so we're kind of going to be wrapping up the show.
Okay.
What's a habit somebody could begin doing, say like a beginner, if they haven't been meditating, and then maybe a habit for someone who has been doing it? What would kind of be like a next step?
So for beginners, I would say, well, understand that no one's a beginner in consciousness, right? We experience everything in our life through consciousness. Consciousness is what we are at our core. And so we're all masters of conscious experience of life. And so all of us, exactly where we are right now, can begin to shift that consciousness. So I'm not this big believer in like baby steps and things. I think people can learn to meditate at any stage in their life. and you don't necessarily have to take this slow incremental path into it. As far as little habits and things, that sensory experience I talked about.
Okay.
Right? Like just catching yourself getting distracted or numbing yourself or distracting or sedating yourself and just going, oh, now I'm just going to look at the world, or I'm going to listen to the world, or I'm going to feel the sensations that are coming in through my sensory system, my skin. Just little check-ins like that are good. Another really powerful way to develop a momentary sort of habit or a habit in the moment is just with a breath. There's a lot of beautiful breathwork. JP, fantastic breathwork teacher. We both took his class. But you can use the breath in the moment just like this. You breathe in. And you just take a few seconds before you breathe out. Because breathing is normally unconscious, and so there's something about consciously interrupting that rhythm that allows for a moment of clarity. Right? It's a really good thing to do before you send that email. It's a really good thing to do before you engage in some eat the next Thin Mint cookie. Right? Just it allows you a point of perspective, and everyone can do it, and you can do it now. You can do it in this moment. Cool. So those are both little daily habits. I think the most transformative habit is to find a way you can meditate consistently, and whether that's listening to an app, whether that's doing a guided meditation, whether that's doing a practice like flow meditation or Vedic meditation that I teach, the goal is to find something that you can do on a daily basis, as we were talking about, because it's daily habits that have the most powerful impact.
Right.
And I would say let go of this idea that you can't meditate, because if there's anything that I've learned is that absolutely anyone can meditate. I've taught at least 100 people who have assured me with some weird perverse pride that they'd be the one that I couldn't teach. Yeah. I'm the one. I'm the hard case. You're not going to be able to teach me, and they all have learned.
And I'm sure you're like, well, perfect, because I was that guy too.
Yeah, I was convinced I couldn't do it. And
yeah. Just one thing to add with that. Someone taught me, a spiritual teacher that I had. They taught me this one thing, and I want to share it with you because it was super powerful. Uh-huh. And it was, when you feel stress or anxiety, to just remind yourself of the date and the time and what year it is. And then begin to work on breathing. I like that. And so it was really cool it took me like a year to figure out what the hell that meant, but it was really cool just to be like, hey, today is May 15th. It's 2019. It's 11:32 a.m.
Yeah.
And if you just sit there for a second and think about that, a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the worries go away, and you come back into this present moment. And then I would usually start going through kind of a breathing exercise, because it took me away from everything else and brought me back to this present place. And that's one of my favorite ways to come back into just the present moment.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that. And again, we just want to find what works for us, what works consistently for us. On the course, I teach meditation, I teach breath work, I teach mindfulness and visualization. And the idea is that all of these things can work together. And there may be some situations where one works for you and others where another works for you. There may be a way of combining them that works for you. Yeah. And the goal is to give people a lot of very accessible tools that they can then structure their own sort of practice around. But again, it is a practice. You have to do it for it to have any effect. Knowing about meditation, knowing about breath work, knowing about that technique you talked about does nothing for you.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, so,
even if you do know, it's like, well, what does that really mean?
It's like push-ups. It's like you can absolutely know the physiology and kinesiology of push-ups. If you don't do them, they do nothing for you.
Yeah, and I always think about, for me, it's like, well, if I'm in a crowded place, but I'm feeling anxiety, I want to kind of have the same experience as meditation. Sometimes breath work, I can do that. If I'm in another place where maybe there's less noise, less distraction, then maybe I use the meditation where I, sit down and do that. And I like to kind of explore what works best for me in situations, because we don't always have 10 minutes or 20 minutes. But if I have a couple minutes and I can, do the thing like you said on the phone, it's like just setting it down and just kind of looking around what's going on. So I think, you've shared some very powerful ways that we can use and access meditation without feeling like, you got to go through this structure and process of, okay, it's going to take the next hour.
Yeah. I don't have my cushion.
I can't. Well, I can't sit with my legs crossed.
Yeah.
Do I really have to touch my index finger and my thumb? Do I have to burn incense?
Yeah.
But I want to thank you for being a guest on here. It's been great, and I love going through your program. If you guys have not checked out James Brown, the white James Brown, and seen his info on Vedic meditation, I'm going to put it in the show notes again. And then also, if you want to get into a class that is really going to elevate how you meditate, I think that rhymes, man. That could be like your next thing, elevate how you meditate.
There you go.
But to find your flow. And, I want to thank you for being here and just being a resource for us.
That's great. It was really enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. So any last words for Habit-Based Lifestyle podcast people?
Just to remember that when it's all said and done, you're not a human doing, you're a human being. And the greatest experience you're going to have, the fullest experience of life that's possible, is when you live from that place of being, not from that place of endlessly doing.
Awesome, man. I love it.
Yeah.
That's great. And it's been one of the things this year, I think, since about January, was being versus doing. And I remember coming back from the Bulletproof Conference and hearing you speak on that again. It was like just reaffirming what I'd been learning throughout the year. So that's been really cool.
Great. Thank you, man.
Yeah. If you guys are looking to connect further with a group of like-minded people, join myself and so many others in the Habit-Based Lifestyle Secrets group on Facebook. This is where I'll be dropping daily habits to help you live to your full potential. If you want to be one of our next case studies and begin living this habit-based lifestyle, check out my website, JESSEEWELL.com. If you have any questions, comments, requests, feel free to contact me, Jesse at habitbasedlifestyle.com. Until next episode, have a great day.